Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois, and we have got a great show for you today. We have some gardening questions for you, some early season gardening questions have already started to come in, and we get it. It's getting warm out, but we have to make sure that we temper some of our desires and wants to be out working in the garden. And I cannot do this by myself. I am joined, as always, by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. Have you gotten out yet? Check out your garden and landscapes.
So I am avoiding all the temptation to pull leaves away from plants, to do all this and that. I'm just trying to walk around, just look at the ground, be like, have you started sprouting yet? Are you coming up? And I've got daffodils that are just about ready to bloom. I have hyacinth that I can see the flower begin to push up from the middle of the center of those leaves. And tulips, of course, they're fully leafed out, just waiting for a flower bud to come up. And so it's already started, and it's March 14th, Pi Day. Happy Pi Day, Ken.
Yes, happy Pi Day.
How about yourself? Have you been getting out in the garden?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of pruning here and there. We've got some trees that are kind of shading our garden, our vegetable garden a little bit, so I pruned those up. And we've got crocus coming up. I think some of our crocus are probably getting close to done blooming already. Daffodils, same thing. Up, flower stalks are up. I've noticed a few houses around here in Jacksonville, their daffodils are actually blooming, and tulips are up too. So It's feels earlier than normal. I have to go back and check pictures from previous years, but it seems we're a little earlier than normal.
Yes. I actually was just looking at pictures from last year. And so last year in April, we had snow, and it had already warmed up and things were greened up, but it snowed in April. And I just thought it was very neat because it was the juxtaposition of the bright green spring grass with the snow on top. And it was created by the canopy of the trees that block the snow from falling in certain areas. It was pretty stunning and beautiful, but the snow melted within a day. So, but it's just got to remember, we're still technically in winter, and spring, at least early spring for us here in Illinois, it can go many different directions. Just got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think that was last year. We had tulips up when it snowed. We had some nice pictures. I'll have to see if I can find one. We can throw that in.
Yes, I'll see if I can get these in here too, because we had bluebells and all. I mean, it was full bloom spring landscape, and then just snow started falling. So speaking of snow and weather and gardening, we have got some questions today that we are going to be answering. So these are real questions from real people, not bots or AI generated, whatever they're called these days. We promise these are from living, breathing human beings. And so, Ken, we should probably go ahead and get started with our lineup of questions this week. Would you mind kicking us off, please?
All right. So the first question we have is, what's the difference between frost-free and average last frost dates? Which coming up on some of that here in a little bit.
Yes. Now, you can correct my poorly worded definition of these things, but what I think of as frost-free date, this is kind of that last recorded frost, for that recording period. And we probably need to have a better expert on maybe than either of us. Trent Ford is who comes to mind, who can help us define these. But I think the window of time they measure this in is 30 years. Is that correct? That they go back 30 years to figure out when is that dead last frost-free date. And then after that, there hasn't been any freeze.
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm trying to picture the maps in my mind, and what's the key say? I think it's 30 years. Seems to ring a bell anyway.
Yeah. So frost-free date, that's that very last, that's the latest frost event that was ever recorded in that span of time. And so planting stuff after that, you're pretty much assuming you're going to be pretty safe in terms of not having to encounter any frost. But Ken, what about like your average frost date? How does that compare?
So I think that again, that's looking at that range of dates as to when the last frost is, and that's just kind of taking the average date of those, that range. And I think they're moving a lot towards median last frost, because that you get rid of some of those extremes, doesn't affect it as much. So there's still, at that point, there's still like a 50% chance you're going to get a frost. So you're, to some extent, we're out of the woods, but you still run the risk of getting a frost. So you're still waiting for all of our warm season crops or sensitive crops. You're not going to be planting those out yet. Typically, we're doing that at last frost, or maybe a week or two before last frost.
So with protection, like with you making sure that if you need to, you throw a blanket or something over that stuff, because we can still, I really prefer putting my warm season stuff out when I know that my nighttime temperatures are definitely away from the 30s. I would prefer them to be in the 50s if possible, because if we go in the 40s and you got your tomato plants out there, it's going to set them back for like 2 weeks. So, and there's enough things working to set my tomatoes back. I don't need random cold weather.
Yeah, a lot of those for vegetables, the warm seasons, they want soil temperatures in the 50s. Otherwise, they sit there and don't do anything. So, so I know for here in Jacksonville, typically we're talking, I think our frost-free date is early to mid-May, but typically, you're planting tomatoes May 15th is what I usually recommend. And I think our average last frost is around mid-April. So we've got a month there between our average last frost and our frost-free date.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Same thing here in Macomb. And, we're looking at about mid-May for planting out some of those traditional garden vegetables that we often think about when we think about gardening. Well, Ken, our next question is one I don't know if either of us have much experience with, but we'll ask it anyway, and we'll weigh in. Do you find that Farmer's Almanac dates to be good to go by or not? What do you think? Farmer's Almanac dates, do we use them or not?
So I'll say my grandpa used to get Farmer's Almanac. I think it was every year for Christmas. But I can say as an adult, I don't know if I've ever looked at it, so I can't say how accurate the dates are. I can't imagine they're too terribly off. I would say they're probably looking at the averages just like everything else, but I cannot have an informed opinion on that one.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe in terms of those frost-free dates, by average frost, like when they're talking about those, yeah, they're probably using the same numbers as we do when we give these recommendations. Some of the things like, oh, it's going to be a really cold, brutally cold winter next year. Like, I don't know how they could predict that, but I wish we need to like document like, okay, Farmer's Almanac says it's going to be brutally cold, and then actually see what the winter's like, and then go back to double check these things. But I don't
Sure,
have
somebody
the time.
has.
Someone has. I'm sure we could just do a quick Google, but I don't know, Ken, I don't have the energy to do that right now. Maybe desire to do that.
Next on the list of things to do.
It's a long list right now. So, oh yeah, busy time of year. And that's really good. We're really happy for just how wonderful the weather has been. So,
all right. So our next question is, does the planting date differ depending on whether you plant seeds or a small plant or transplant?
We kind of mentioned that with tomatoes and soil temperatures. But yeah, so if you're going to sow seed out into the soil outdoors, you really do need to have kind of a mind of what is that temperature. And many times we break our crops into two different groups. We have our cool season crops and we have our warm season crops. There are some cool season crops like spinach, potatoes, things like that could probably even be planted close to right now, and they would germinate well because they can grow in cool soils. Well, potatoes technically aren't germinating, but they're sprouting. You know what I mean? However, if we get to some of those warm season crops, we think about beans or peppers and things like that. You put them in cold soil, they're not going to do anything. So that's very often so that we can get a jump on the season, we will start those indoors, or you can buy them from a nursery or growing garden center, and you can plant them as transplants, which gives you a couple weeks to a month head start on the growing season. So yes, there is a difference.
Yeah, I'd say think of it as, basically that seed and that plant doesn't, those weather conditions are going to affect it, whether it's a seed or a plant. So that date's not going to change. It's you're shaving off that, what do we start tomatoes 5 to 6 weeks before we plant them outside.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saving yourself a month plus time. If you're to direct seed that tomato, you're looking at what, maybe September.
Yeah, end of August, September, by the time you get a love apple there. So yeah. So our next question is about starting seeds inside. So when starting seeds indoors to transplant outside, should grow lights be turned on as soon as the seeds are planted or not? Do you wait until they sprout? And would window light be enough for germination? Ken, what are your thoughts on indoor supplemental lighting?
There's a lot to unpack on this one.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as should lights be turned on, I would say yes in general. It could depend. So some seeds do need light for germination, especially some of our smaller plants. Some of the flowers, was like snapdragon, and some of those
Snapdragon and
need
lettuces.
sun. Yeah, need light to germinate. A lot of the vegetables it's not necessary if you're doing vegetables, but again, there are some like lettuce and stuff that do. But it's probably a good idea to leave those on all the time, or start them when you're planting, just so that when stuff does start germinating, you're not having plants germinate in the dark and then they get real long and leggy and lanky, and that causes all kinds of problems, and you can't undo that. So if you're using fluorescent lights, your electric bill isn't going to go up too much, hopefully, doing that. So you're going to be better off leaving that on as soon as you get them out there. And then was it a window light be enough to germinate?
Mm-hmm.
You could probably get them germinated, but again, you're in northern climates, in the winter, we're going to have short day length. The sun isn't as intense, so we're not getting as much light. So again, you're going to get those long, leggy, lanky plants, and they're probably going to be growing towards the lights. You're constantly rotating those pots so they're growing straight, but they're still going to get lanky. So you could use a window, but I would still probably do some supplemental light with a fluorescent light or something like that, just so you're getting enough light and you're getting enough light intensity on those plants.
Yeah, give them both. Give them a window and give them supplemental light if you can. Nothing we can do inside can equal the power of the sun. So that give them the light that you can give them. I would agree everything Ken says, because there was one year I did seed starting inside, and I thought, well, I'll start the seeds and then I'll come back tomorrow and I'll get the light set up. I didn't do that. It was a week goes by and I'm still don't have the light set up yet. So and it was too late. My seedlings were too leggy. They were stretched, and there's no recovery from that. They started like growing and intertwining with each other, and it just became a nightmare. It just would have been easier for me to just totally scrap everything and start over. So get your lights set up, get them set on a timer, get your flats planted, and just go from there, because that is a critical moment when that seedling emerges from the soil. It needs to have light in order to recover and to rebuild that energy that it has just used from that seed to sprout. So it's a critical moment where they really do need a lot of light.
Yeah, you want those nice short compact plants. So you're starting them, you're buying them from the store. But the only thing you can get away with to some extent with leggy plants is tomatoes, because you can plant those deeper.
Yeah.
Then if they're growing in the pot, everything else, you plant them too deep, you're done for. So
yep, they'll rot. Mm-hmm.
All right. And I think our last question here is, this person's confused by planting depth. Twice the width is the general recommendation. So if the seed was shaped like corn, what is the width of that seed?
Well, I would say the seed packet will tell you exactly what you need to know. Just read your seed packet. If you don't have access to a seed packet, you can go online and read all kinds of seed packet information from, your favorite seed supplier, and they have all of that readily online. Give your local extension office a call. If you have a specific plant or seed in mind, we can tell you and what that might be. But that should all be contained on that seed packet.
Yeah, if it's a bigger seed, I usually go to like first knuckle
Mhm.
and put it in. I don't necessarily measure. And if it's smaller seed, soil surface or media, it's not, you're not using soil, you're potting media surface, and maybe sprinkle a little media over it or some vermiculite if it's real small.
Yeah, I like vermiculite as kind of the covering for some of those things like arugula and stuff too.
Keep that algae growth down.
Yes. Ooh. Well, that was a lot of great information about early season gardening, and at least getting us out from underneath the quilts and maybe getting our hands dirty in some potting mix in the basement. The Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by me, Chris Enroth. A special thanks for Ken for once again hanging out with me, talking about gardening. Thank you so much, Ken.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for hanging out, and go enjoy some pie. And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. We're going to be talking with Chris Luking all about cut flowers. Chris, she's with Extension, but she also does grow cut flowers commercially. So she's going to tell us some of her favorite cut flowers and how to grow them. You won't want to miss that one. Listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening, or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing.